All right, so Claude Fable 5 just dropped and people are already asking whether it dethrones Codex. The number that's got me cold, Fable 5 hits 80.3% on SWE Bench Pro, and current Codex doesn't even have a published equivalent score to compare it to. This comparison matters right now because both tools dropped major updates and developers are actively picking one to build on. I ran Claude Fable 5 against Codex across 4 real tests, pulled from 17 verified sources, and there's zero vendor money involved here. Honestly, the part that surprised me most is the pricing math. Because if you're running high volume API calls, picking the wrong model could cost you real money every single month. And the answer is probably not the one most people assume. So this one's for developers and teams who are actually shipping code with AI, not just playing around. If you're choosing between these two for production work, the wrong call means either paying 2 times too much per token or running into a context cap mid-job that forces you to chunk your whole code base. And both of those hurt. Test 1 is code generation accuracy. And the failure mode here is brutal. You hand the model a real production task, it writes code that looks right, passes a quick glance, and then breaks in staging because the business logic was wrong. And you don't catch it until you've already spent hours reviewing output you thought you could trust. What I looked at here is pretty interesting. Fable 5 is blog reported at 80.3% on SWE Bench Pro, and Stripe says it migrated a 50 million line Ruby code base in 1 day versus 2 months by hand. Codex, no current equivalent figure published at all, and the old human eval numbers floating around are from a 2021 paper on a totally different model. So you can't stack those side by side. Now, I want to be upfront about something before we call this one. These are not apples to apples scores. Fable 5's numbers come from Anthropic's own blog. And Codex's human eval figures are from a 2021 paper on a completely different product. So community testers say Codex handles boilerplate well, but loses the thread on multi-step business logic, meaning the gap might be real, but it's directional, not proven. Okay, so I was expecting this to be closer, but with Fable 5 sitting at 80.3% on SWE, Bench Pro, and Codex having zero published current equivalent, Fable 5 takes test 1 on the strength of what's actually out there. Codex might be competitive, but you can't score what you can't see, and that puts Claude Fable 5 up 1-0. Test 2 is context window and long document handling. Failure mode is you're midway through a whole repo review, the model hits its context cap, and now you're manually chunking files and stitching outputs back together, which takes time and introduces errors. And if you're on Codex, going over that cap also triggers a 2x price surcharge. What surprised me here is how clean this one is. Fable 5 gives you 1 million tokens by default, no price premium, same rate all the way through, while Codex caps at 400,000 tokens in tool, and once you push past 272,000 input tokens, you're paying 2 times on inputs and 1.5x on outputs. I checked both vendor docs and press sources, and these numbers are verified. Honestly, I expected this to be tighter, but Fable 5's 1 million token default is 2.5 times Codex's in-tool cap with no surcharge at all, while Codex charges more the longer your job runs. So Fable 5 takes test 2 by a pretty wide margin, and that makes it 2 for Claude Fable 5, nothing for Codex so far. This test 3 is API pricing at scale, and this one stings in a very specific way. You build your whole pipeline on one model, you skip the per token math upfront, and then your monthly bill comes in and it's double what you expected, because at high volume, a 2x input price difference is a budget conversation with your whole team, not a rounding error. So I looked at the verified press figures, and here's what we got. Fable 5 runs $10 per million input tokens and $50 per million output tokens, while GPT-5, 5 Direct API, which powers Codex, is $5 per million input and $30 per million output. So that's 2 times cheaper on input and 1.67 times cheaper on output, though Codex's credit-based subscription makes a direct comparison genuinely hard. Now, before the verdict, Fable 5's 90% prompt caching discount is a real thing. If your workload reuses a lot of the same context, that cached input rate drops to $1 per million, which closes the gap pretty fast. And Codex's credit subscription at $100 to $200 per developer per month gives teams a predictable ceiling with its own value. So the pricing story depends a lot on your actual usage pattern. I was expecting the cash and discount to make this a coin flip, but at standard rates, the gap is just too big. GPT-5 .5 is 2 times cheaper on input and 1.67 times cheaper on output. And that math wins test 3 for Codex. So the scoreboard now sits at 2 for Claude Fable 5, 1 for Codex, and we've got 1 test left. Test 4 is instruction following consistency across complex tasks. And the failure mode is drift. You give the model a 12-step agentic job. It nails the first 6 steps. And then somewhere around step 8, it forgets a constraint you set at the top, and you don't catch it until the whole run finishes and you're reviewing broken output. What surprised me here is the intelligence index gap. Fable 5 sits at number 1 on the artificial analysis intelligence index with a score of 64.9, and on AA Omniscience, it scores 61% accuracy versus 57% for GPT-5. 5, which is a 4-point edge, and on long horizon agentic runs, Fable 5 sustains multi-day goal-directed tasks, while Codex has no published equivalent figure, though I take that long horizon claim with a grain of salt since it's vendor reported. Okay, so before we call this, Codex's GPT 5.5 engine is noticeably faster on single turn completions. And if you're doing interactive coding sessions where you're going back and forth quickly, that speed difference is real and it matters. Community users running 50 prompt tests found Codex loses the thread on business logic, but that's a directional signal, not a controlled study. So this one depends on whether you're doing quick turns or long runs. Honestly, I thought Codex's speed advantage might make this a split, but on sustained complex tasks, Fable 5's #1 intelligence index ranking and that 4-point AA omniscience edge push it over the line. So Fable 5 takes test 4, and that's 3 for Claude. Fable 5, 1 for Codex across the 4 tests. So where does Claude Fable 5 clearly win? Context is the big one. 1 million tokens by default, no surcharge, versus Codex's 400,000 cap with a 2x price hit above 272,000. And it also wins on long horizon agentic runs, ranks #1 on the intelligence index. And its 90% prompt caching discount makes repeated context workloads way cheaper at scale. Now, where does Codex win? Pricing straight up. GPT, $5 per million input tokens versus $10 for Fable 5 and $30 per million output versus $50. It's also noticeably faster on single turn completions, which matters a lot for interactive sessions. And the credit subscription gives teams a predictable monthly cost ceiling instead of an open-ended per token bill. I was expecting the pricing gap to make this a lot closer overall, but Fable 5 earned its wins on context and intelligence. So here's the decision rule. If you're running long agentic jobs, whole repo reviews, or multi-day autonomous tasks, go with Claude Fable 5. But if you're doing interactive coding sessions, boilerplate work, or high-volume API calls where cost per token is the main constraint, Codex on GPT 5.5 is probably enough.